So we talked about in part 1 of lesson 6.5 square roots. We're going to talk about part 2 of this lesson and talk about imperfect squares or imperfect square roots. Imperfect square roots is when we have the square root of a number that doesn't come out exactly as a perfect whole number. So, for example, here, the square root of 115, that does not come out to be exactly 11 or exactly 10. It's somewhere in between the two. And so these are the kinds of things we're going to look at in part 2 of this lesson. So as an example, let's take 95. If I want to find the square root of 95, this is an imperfect square. There isn't an exact whole number times itself that equals 95. And so I'm going to think about what perfect squares do I know that are close to 95. Well, I know that the square root of 81 is 9, and I know that the square root of 100 is 10. And so if I think about on a number line, 95 would fall somewhere between 81 and 100. It would fall closer to 100 than it would to 81. And so I might estimate and I may say, okay, the square root of 95 is about 10. It's not exactly 10, so notice I didn't use the equal to, but I said it's about 10. Or I could use a calculator. If I have a number that's not a perfect square root, I could use a calculator, right? So I could type in on my calculator the square root of 74, and notice that I get this big, long, never-ending decimal. Okay, if we're going to use our calculator to estimate a square root, I want us right now, and here I'm telling you to round to the nearest tenth. So notice this big long decimal. We're going to round to the tenth spot. So we're going to look right here in the tenth spot. We're going to look to the right. That's a 0. So we're going to say the square root of 74 is about 8.6. So we just had two methods of estimating an imperfect square root. We can use sort of a number line idea related to the common perfect squares we learned, or we could use a calculator. Notice the directions here say approximate each square root. No calculator, so let's use what we know. Let's think. Square root of 52. What square roots do we know similar to 52? Well, I know that 49 is a perfect square. And I know that 64 is a perfect square. So I know a perfect square a little smaller than 52, and I know a perfect square a little greater than 52. Now let's think. 52 on a number line would fall closer to which one? 49 or 64? Well, it would fall closer to 49. So let's think. What is the square root of 49? Well, that would be 7. What is the square root of 64? That would be 8. Since 52 is closer to 49, we would say the square root of 52 is about 7. Let's do 136. Okay, let's think of our perfect squares. Well, 121 is a perfect square, and that would be less than 136. 144 is a perfect square. That would be a little greater than 136. So let's think, 136, is that closer to 121 or closer to 144? You may say, well, it's pretty close to the middle. And that's true, but let's think for a minute. From 121 to 136, I would go up 15 spots on the number line. From 136 to 144, I would go up 8 spots. So it's closer to 144. So the square root of 144 is 12. Square root of 121 is 11. And so since 136 is closer to 144, we will say the square root of 136 is about 12. Let's do that one more time with 17. I know a perfect square less than 17 is 16. A perfect square a bit greater than 17 is 25. And of course, on a number line, we know 17 is much closer to 16. So the square root of 16 is 4. So we would say the square root of 17 is about 4. So that's using the whole idea of just estimating the perfect square with our perfect squares that we know, and deciding, is the imperfect square closer to which one? The one that's greater or the one that's less than? Or if we're told to approximate the square root to the nearest tenth, that's going to imply we're going to use our calculator. So we're going to use our calculator again, as we talked about in lesson 6.5a. We're going to use that square root key. So let's find the square root of 42, keeping in mind we're going to round to the nearest tenth. So on my calculator, I see these digits, 6.48. Here's the tenth spot. I look to the right. It's greater than 5. So I'm going to say the square root of 42 is about 6.5. Let's do that with 156. Square root of 156, I get 12.48. So here's my tenth spot. I look to the right. That's greater than 5. So I'm going to round up and say the square root of 156 is about 12.5. Let's try that with 275. Square root of 275, I get in my on my calculator screen, I get 16.58. So here's my tenth spot. I look to the right. Since that's above 5, I round up and I say the square root of 275 is about 16.6.